On your Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, no big deal. We're only talking about the single most important question facing the Toronto Raptors over the next year or two.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, August the 9th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the Hell website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors, and of course, you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. Yes, it's the off season, but the little sickos in there simply cannot stop posting about your Toronto Raptors. Come join the sickos. It's free to do. Link in the description of the podcast. We would love to see you become part of our listener family over on Discord. It's a great time. Also, a great time is subscribing to the podcast on your audio app of choice. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, whatever the app of choice tells you to do to support the podcast you love. Do it, and you'll have my appreciation and gratitude for the rest of time. Thanks so much in advance for supporting us on audio. You can also find us on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and you will get a push notification every single time the show is about to premiere or go live, so you never miss a second of that sweet, sweet off-season Locked On Raptors action, baby. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The Olympics are close to ending as well. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We will get started here on a show where we're digging into one of the big questions facing the Toronto Raptors over the next couple of years here. Just how viable is the trio of Scottie Barnes, Immanuel Quickley, and RJ Barrett? How much juice does BBQ got? That's on tap today. We're going to get into swing skills for each of the three core players on this Raptors team, expectations for 2024-25, and we're going to do it all with our dear pal, Vivek Jacob from Sportsnet and Raptors in 7, among other places. How the hell are you, pal?
I'm doing great. I mean, obviously, feeling a bit down still about the Canada-France game. I rewatched that first quarter, just trying to process and understand everything that happened. And it was just so infuriating to see the mistakes, to see the bad shot selection and all of that. And that was basically the game. So still recovering from that. But besides that, in good spirits, man.
I mean, I feel just like my basketball spirit has been enriched by watching that Serbia-USA game yesterday, which was fantastic. It was one of the most butthole clenchy basketball games I've watched in quite some time. I was rooting for Serbia to pull off the upset, but watching the guys who dominated the last 15 years, 20 years of NBA basketball will the States to that win, pretty rad. I had a pretty damn good time watching it. And frankly, I did not need Jason Tatum to go and ruin it. So stop complaining, Celtics fans. All right, let's get into the topic of today's show. BBQ, Barnes, Barrett, Quickley. Obviously, there's been a big investment made in both Barnes and Quickley. Barrett, we'll see about sort of what the future holds for him. But as it stands, those three guys are the three guys this thing is built around. And I think the plan for this year is to just kind of see what's there, see just how viable it can be as a trio going forward. A refresher on some of the numbers from last year. The Barrett, Barnes, Quickley trio played 914 possessions together per clean the glass. They had a plus 3.8 net rating. They had a 63rd percentile offensive rating at 116.8, a 73rd percentile defensive rating, maybe a bit of a surprise there, slightly above average at 113.0. And the starting lineup they played in with Gary Trent Jr. and Jakob Poeltl, I've said the number a million times, plus 11.8 per 100 possessions over 347 possessions together. Positive signs considering all of the hell that was going on around them on the roster with the team build and everything. What's your just sort of general feeling on the trio that is Barnes, Barrett, and Quickley? Was there anything last year that sort of points towards this being a top three you can go to work with and, you know, work yourself into being a perennial top 4 to 6 playoff team in the Eastern Conference, which I think is kind of the goal to shoot for? What you got on the BBQ trio and how viable it can be going forward?
So for me, when you think about the individual ceilings of each player, you project Scottie at his best to be a superstar,
Mhm.
top 10 player in the league. Uh, at his best, you would think Immanuel Quickley should be an all-star. And you would think that RJ Barrett could be a legitimate two-way scorer.
Right.
And I think if you have those three things and you build the right way, the roster the right way around them, you're looking at a team that should be in position to get home court advantage for the
Sure.
playoffs.
Mhm.
Now, do I think they can be? Is that good enough to be a top two seed? Maybe not.
Mhm.
Probably more of a 3 or 4 seed, depending on how things shake out. But I do think that that's a very good team. The floor is probably what you're looking at going into this season,
Right.
where it's like a play-in team, right? And I think that is probably the range that you're looking at, and there's going to have to be different things that really swing around the roster to take it maybe into that top 2 category.
Definitely, like, the roster build around them will be important. I also think there are certain swing skills. We'll get into this coming up, like certain swing skills with each guy that will dictate whether they get to those high end outcomes or not. But I do think, just as a pure matter of ceiling, I do agree with you. Like, if Scottie Barnes can be the top 10 to 12 player in the league that I think the Raptors think he can be, I think a lot of Raptors fans think he can be. Maybe there's some skepticism in some corners about that. And I think it's fair considering some of the weaknesses in his game, the things that needs to still be improved. I think I'm with you that at the very high end, Immanuel Quickley can be an all-star. Is that the most likely outcome? Maybe not. It's a loaded position in the league right now. If he can be like a top 10 point guard in the league, I think you're laughing. I think that's a really nice building block. And I do think that contract, which I know people got mad about when it first was signed, is going to age very gracefully as the cap goes up. And then Barrett, I think, is probably the biggest wild card of the bunch. Like, I feel pretty good about the Quickley Barnes duo and them at least approaching their respective ceilings. Barrett, I still have yet to figure out exactly what his ceiling is. And I do think we'll get into it. The defense with him is a massive, massive question that's going to dictate a lot about whether he's even part of this core going forward, beyond the next season or two. Obviously, the end of his contract will come up quicker than IQ or Barnes, and there's going to be a decision to be made on him at some point here in the sort of relative, near future. And so, yeah, like this is a big year for Barrett for sure. But I think as just like a building block of three guys to go to work with, if you're sort of looking around the Eastern Conference and trying to compare it to other big threes, top three guys on teams, I think it can be comparable to what the Magic have cooking with Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner and Jalen Suggs. I think there's sort of, very different styles of play in there, but talent wise, I think it's pretty comparable. And everyone seems to think the Magic are on some trajectory to be this great team. I'm not so much there. I think they'll be fine. They still need a guard of some kind to really take them over the top. But you look at the Pacers, right? Tyrese Halliburton, is he the uber star he looked like he was at the start of last year, or something a little below that? Pascal Siakam, Miles Turner as a big three there. I think the Raptors have something comparable in terms of talent to that as well. And these are top 6 teams in the Eastern Conference, at least, projected to be going into this year. So I do think they're on the right track. The rest of the roster certainly needs some work, and it's going to be incumbent upon the young guys they've taken in the draft this year, last year with Grady Dick, and whoever gets drafted coming up in the next couple of years as well, to sort of fill in the gaps around them and make it a more cohesive and fully functioning enterprise. But yeah, I feel pretty good about the BBQ trio just on their own. How much stock do you put into their numbers last season in limited run, in a weird team context, on a team that had no direction, at a plus 3.8 per 100 with them on the floor? Do you buy them as just like a trio that can go out and generally win their minutes when they're on the floor together?
I do. I think that's where, again, it comes down to the roster build where, okay, how much of that is Jakob Poeltl on the floor?
Mhm.
In terms of the long-term outlook, okay, who is that defender that is going to slot alongside Quickly and Barrett
Yeah.
to improve that ceiling? So I do think you have enough to work with that trio, but it's uh, there are enough flaws that make what you're looking for around them very, very specific, and there
Yeah.
isn't maybe as much malleability to work with.
Yeah, I think like the shooting question was Scotty, and I do think like it's still a fair question about RJ Barrett too, even though I think the diet of threes he got with the Raptors last year is pretty sustainable for him to maybe not shoot 39%, but 37, 38. I think that's there on pretty easy catch and shoots. He's totally cut out the pull-up stuff from his game, and that's been to his benefit. I think the way those skills interact, Barrett, Quickley, Barnes, the three of them, I think there's a lot of cohesion there. It is going to come down to the other pieces, the shooting, the spacing, the floor geometry around them, and their own shooting and spacing is going to have a big say in that too, at least on the offensive end, obviously. Defensively, there are all kinds of other questions with, I think, both Quickley and Barrett at this point. I think Barnes, maybe we're kind of seeing what type of defender he's going to be crystallized. We've kind of figured it out. Yes, there's some on-ball stuff that if he can figure that out, it answers a whole lot of their questions as well. But I do think, skill set wise, just fit wise, it does make sense. It makes a lot more sense than Anunoby, Siakam, Barnes did, even if the latter trio maybe has a little bit more in terms of high end upside talent, at least right now. Obviously down the line, maybe we're talking about the Quickley, Barnes, Barrett trio having a higher talented upside than that trio ever did. So we'll come back on the other side, get into the swing skills for Barrett, Quickley, and IQ that kind of make this whole thing work if they hit, or leave all kinds of questions if they don't. We'll come and do that just in just 1 second. Today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Ben, look, it's an important thing to take care of yourself even when life gets busy. Maybe you're getting ready for back to school. You've got kids' activities, big work projects of your own. It's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know it makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it because life is just life. There's a lot going on. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. I know a lot of people who have really benefited from therapy. It helps you guide yourself through life's tough decisions. It's not just about reacting or sort of absorbing major trauma. It can just be about dealing with the things life throws at you every single day and making sure you're prioritizing yourself and taking care of yourself so you can be the best person for you and the people around you. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Back at it here with Big V, Vivek Jacob, digging into the BBQ trio and its viability and the swing skills for Scottie Barnes, Immanuel Quickley, and RJ Barrett that will make or break this trio for the Toronto Raptors going forward. Before we do that, just a reminder, make your second listen of the day Locked on NBA. Great show with all of our local hosts kind of coming together, a different set of hosts every day, digging into all that's going on in the NBA. And of course, plenty of Olympic basketball talk right now. If you want to get the full readout on that game yesterday between Serbia and the USA, Locked in NBA is your place to go after you're done listening here. All right, let's get back into it. Swing skills. Let's start with Scottie Barnes. I feel like this is maybe the hardest one to answer of the three, so we'll go to it first. He got better at basically everything last year. There are still some things that could be touched up, of course. What do you have as the biggest swing skill for Scottie Barnes that is going to sort of transform him from what he is now into the sort of lead talisman of a team that can be a legit perennial playoff threat? What you got for his swing skill?
So I think the easy answer here is the 3-point shot, but
Sure.
I am going to go with the mid-range. And I think when you look at the top tier players, that's the area of the floor in the postseason, especially where they are able to dictate terms. They are able to take whatever defense is giving them and say, okay, in case of emergency, break glass and go into this mid-range mode and just knock down shots. And I think that's where if Scottie can develop that, where, we kind of see if he isn't able to take the three early in the clock, or if he doesn't have that open look, then it's all about how to just get into the paint, right? And so I think if he can genuinely add that mid-range shot and open up the floor for himself in that way, I think that would be a complete game changer for how he's viewed as a scorer, which would then open up obviously his playmaking and everything.
100%. I am with you fully. I know the 3-point shot, sort of the low-hanging fruit thing that people will gravitate towards, and they'll look at the struggles in the back half of last year after he started so red hot from deep. He ends up shooting about 34% by the time it's all said and done. Got real cold in January and beyond. I think a lot of that is tied to there was no more Pascal Siakam. There was no more easily created looks from deep for him because he was having to do a whole lot. The team context, again, just made no sense. It was an absolute disaster. And ultimately, the numbers still pretty encouraging for the threes that you want Scottie Barnes taking. Catch and shoots last season. I think I've shared this number before, but I'll reiterate it again. 3.9 catch and shoot attempts last season per game, 38.5%. You will take that all day long. And even if defenses aren't going to necessarily close out hard on Scottie Barnes taking stationary catch and shoot threes, I think Scottie Barnes, similar to what Pascal Siakam had, he's one of the guys who can kind of utilize the space that teams are giving him and weaponize it, right? He can get going downhill with those big bounding strides, get to the places he wants to work. And oftentimes that is the mid-range, to your point. Last season, he was in the 85th percentile among all players in terms of frequency of mid-range shots taken. 36% of all of his shots came from either the short or the long mid-range. And he just didn't hit specifically from the short mid-range the way you'd want. 42nd percentile, 39%, a career low for him from the short mid-range, which is interesting considering he got better at basically everything else. Going back to his rookie year, 45% from the short mid-range. If he can get back to that, I think it becomes pretty damaging and like really, really damaging for others, really excellent for him and his trajectory, because like he can get to that spot whenever he wants. He's stronger than most guys. He can utilize space. If he's attacking closeouts, that's there for him. I mean, he's probably getting all the way to the rim in most of those cases when he's attacking a closeout too. And so, yeah, I'm with you. Getting that touchback from the short mid-range, those post shots, those little flip shots that he kind of has, like he gets to them whenever he wants. If he can rediscover that touch, it's a game changer because that takes him from the 20-point a game scorer to the guy who can sort of nudge up towards 24, 25, 26, which you probably want from your lead guy. And you know, the amount of attention he draws in there as well. If he's someone who's causing panic for defenses because, oh God, Scottie's 8 feet from the rim, he's going to hit this, we got to send 2 to the ball. Very few guys in the NBA are able to punish double teams the way Scottie Barnes can. And I think now with a little bit more shooting around him, with a little bit more of a sort of viable team context and court geometry around him, that's only going to get more damaging if he becomes lethal once again from the short mid-range. Really encouraging stuff from long mid-range last year, 43%, a career best for him from that range. You know, he kind of flashed that in his rookie season as well, the sort of 18 to 20 footers. If that's there too, I mean, that is like the real superstar stuff. But I'm more focused on the short mid-range as the swing skill for him, at least for now. What do you got for RJ Barrett? I think my answer is pretty obvious, and I've been kind of pounding the drum for this, but I'm curious what you think. What's the swing skill for RJ Barrett?
Defense. I think it has to be the individual defense. I think even when you look at the games that happened over the course of the Olympics, if you want to look at the France game in particular, Cordinier was his matchup.
Yep.
And yeah, obviously there were times where he got, switched on to Lasorte, got switched on to Yabusele, and then that didn't work out well. But I think that matchup in particular, it's like, okay, it's one thing to struggle against the guys who are bigger and stronger than you, but that should have been something where he could have been, it really just came down to accountability and attention to detail. And you look at those 2 pull-up threes that Cordinier hit in the first quarter. Barrett was just like backing into the paint.
Yep.
Like in this sort of like, let's protect the rim first. And it's like, that's your man. Like, pick up the ball. And I think that type of awareness is what concerns me. And I think that is something, especially considering how high leverage a game that was, you can look at moments in last season and say, okay, the Raptors didn't have much to play for, this and that, right? And so, but when you're making those kinds of mistakes in that high leverage of a game, that to me is concerning. And so that needs to improve significantly for him to reach his ceiling.
100%. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that RJ Barrett's trajectory on defense is like going to be directly tied to whether he is part of the core of this team long term. Maybe there's a way in which they can find the defensive upgrade they need on the wings to sort of mitigate having Barrett be their lone sort of wing stopper guy right now, and still keep Barrett on the team. That'll be tough to sort of thread that needle financially, I'm sure. There's a possibility for it, but I do think, if Barrett doesn't prove he's got the chops to legit be a two-way wing who can, go and guard the opposing team's best player, even if he's not doing it at like an all defense level, doing it at a passable level that gives them a shot, offering some resistance, which he just did not do last year, really in any stretch for the Raptors. It was pretty rough watching him play defense. And I'm willing to give it a bit of a pass because like the team's defensive context was awful and no one defended well and there was no plan and there was no structure, especially when there was no Jakob Poeltl. And I think Canada had some similar issues with the lack of sort of backline rim protection to kind of give guys insulation too. But yeah, if it's not better than what it was last year, I think there's a chance RJ Barrett just becomes, this very nice, efficient offensive player who they eventually package in a deal to upgrade truly on the wing, and sort of that's what their team is going forward into the sort of peak of the Scottie Barnes era. It's huge. Like, he doesn't get steals. He was 9th percentile in steal percentage with the Raptors last season, hasn't been higher than 5th percentile since 2020-21, and never higher than 51st percentile in steal percentage. He doesn't really create events on defense. He's not a shot blocker, and just kind of staying in front of his man. I've remarked upon this before, but the sort of like, it's this weird yin and yang where on offense, he's this bowling ball where people just kind of fall off of him as he bruises his way to the rim. It's the opposite on defense, where he's the one kind of getting bounced off of dudes, kind of no matter what, like the strength. We saw it with Matisse Lesor in the Olympics, like backing him down and just sort of like moving Barrett like he's nothing. But that was the same with guards as well and wings. He really had a hard time keeping his spot, holding position, not giving up ground to whoever he was guarding. And that is going to be a massive thing going forward for sure. That is, to me, also the swing skill for Barrett. Immanuel Quickley. I think this is, can kind of go a bunch of different ways here. Eye of the beholder stuff with Quickley. What's his swing skill for you?
I think the frequency with which he's able to get to the rim.
Sure.
I think that is probably what I look at. Like, he is obviously able to knock down the three ball, the pull up three. And I think that is a huge swing skill for the Raptors as a team, because that's something they haven't had enough of. But I think for him individually to get to that all-star level, he is going to have to find ways to get to the rim more consistently. And I think the efficiency is okay. It's just that he doesn't get there often enough.
Yeah.
And, I think we saw over the course of his time with the Raptors that there were maybe too many times where he'd pick up the ball and then he's kind of stuck. And I think a bit more of that gnashing, a bit more of that probing style, because we know he is lightning quick. And I think a bit more of that stop and go, a bit more of that sort of, if you want to call it, trickery in terms of how he's like sort of probing the paint. And I think that's something that could serve him really well.
Yeah, I'm with you as well. I think, there's an element of it'd be nice if like the floater could come back. The sort of short mid-range stuff for him is a big thing, although that's been there more often than not. I think last year is sort of the outlier for him, at least the stretch with the Raptors where he couldn't hit a floater to save his life. I feel like that's going to come back in at least some kind of way this coming season. But yeah, I mean, he's got the touch on the interior and he's got the drive and kick, right? Like, he's a really good drive and kick guy. I think he got better at that picking up the dribble stuff as the season went along last year too, as he kind of got more accustomed to being at the helm of the offense. I think the way he kind of used his handle in close quarters got better as the season went along too. That's all got to still improve. It's got to get better from where it finished last year for sure. But if he can make good on getting to the rim and actually attempting shots from there, that just opens up so much more for him as a playmaker, which I do think is kind of the thing he's going to most bring to the table this coming season. I was so bloody impressed with Quickley's ability to just sort of take the reins and figure out and be like a ball security merchant and a guy who can kind of set guys up on a platter. That gets easier if he can get to the rim a ton. And he only did it 18% of the time last year, 27th percentile in terms of attempts at the rim, but he shot 70% with the Raptors at the rim, 88th percentile there per cleaning the glass. You go back
that's what I
through
was
his
saying. The
career.
efficiency is not an issue.
100%. And so if he can get there more regularly, that is going to open up a whole bunch of stuff. Look at us agreeing on things. We're boring podcasters, man. You could talk me into defense too, although I think his defensive struggles are maybe a little bit overblown. And I think his length and rotation and shot contesting stuff is going to be enough for him to hang as a point guard. You don't need to have a lockdown point guard to really survive in the modern NBA, I don't think. And so I'm not so worried about that as a swing skill for him. It'd be nice if he could lock down a little bit more effectively, but I think the getting to the rim more regularly and sort of weaponizing that, not just for his own offense, but for others, is definitely the swing skill for me with Quickley as well. We'll come back on the other side and hopefully disagree a little bit to keep things spicy here on the podcast as we close things out and take a look at expectations for 2024-25 and the hierarchy. How should it be structured between these three guys in the offense? We'll do that in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by friends over at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. And in the summertime, it gets a little bit, a little more chill. There's less going on. The Euros are behind us now. The Olympics are almost done. The WNBA is coming back. That's great. And MLB is going strong. But other than that, it's pretty light times on the sports schedule. But that's okay because FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily all summer long. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long, to go and wager on the sports that are still in season. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. Maybe you want to go throw some money down on France to beat the U.S. in the Olympic gold medal game. You can go and do that. It's a little happiness hedge. If you want France to win, maybe you bet on the States and you can get some money if the States win and you feel good, or you can just double down on France and be happy if they beat the States. And also you get some money out of it too. Be nice to know that Canada lost to the eventual gold medal winners. It would make me feel a whole lot better at night. Either way, head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. As I said, it's FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and of the Locked On Podcast Network. Rounding things out here with Vivek Jacob, Big V of Sportsnet and Raptors in 7, his Substack newsletter. Just a heads up, next week we're going to have Oren Weisfeld on the show to kind of do a post-mortem on the Olympics for Canada on the men's and women's sides and sort of track the course forward for the next 4 years, talk about what led to the point where they kind of disappointed this year at Paris and all that good stuff. So you have that to look forward to, among other things, next week. Big V. 2024-25 for the BBQ trio. What are your hopes? What are your dreams? As far as like expectations for each guy, how they sort of settle in. I'm not thinking that they're going to go and make good on all of their potential and reach exactly their ceilings this coming season. It's probably more of a few-year project for each of these guys. Maybe, a shorter window for Scottie than Quickley or Barrett or whatever. He's a younger guy, obviously. But, as far as just like what you're hoping to see from these three this coming season, what would classify like a success for the BBQ trio in 2024-25 to you?
So I'll start with RJ. I think offensively, just carryover from last season would be success because it was a fairly small sample size. It was really encouraging what he was able to do to be this uber efficient scorer, shooting 55% overall, 39% from three. Hopefully, making 16 out of 19 free throws at the Olympics carries over to
it's back, baby.
Because he only shot 63% at the line as a Raptor. So you want to see that increase. Definitely don't want to see that carry over. But offensively, I think that would be success, just being able to carry over that efficiency. Defensively, I think the engagement level, the awareness level, that's something that I want to see progress. And so whatever he did last season, I would not consider that successful on the defensive end. Moving on to IQ, I think, probably the biggest thing I'm trying to see is that real chemistry between him and Scottie. I think it was probably patchy at best in the moments that we did see them last season. Obviously, we saw really good chemistry with Jakob Poeltl, but I think that's the thing I'd really like to see come along because let's face it, those two are the cornerstones of the franchise moving forward, and so I think that's the biggest thing I want to see.
Mhm.
Scotty, All Star last season. Let's see All Star again this season. Um, in terms of the areas of improvement, if we can see an uptick in the 3-point shooting from what we saw pretty much post December.
Mhm.
If we can see an uptick in the mid-range shooting, I think that'll be really encouraging. Um, and then I expect, I will say, I expect natural progression in the playmaking. We saw obviously
Yeah.
an uptick last season. I would expect further growth there, and I would not expect to see that stagnate.
Yeah, I think the way I'm looking at it with the trio as sort of like the bar for success is less about the individual stuff and more about the sort of team success that they have when they're on the floor. Like, I'm not worried about wins this season, really. Like, wins will come, wins will not come, whatever. The number I'm going to be kind of checking in after every single game is those three guys on the floor and they're on off, right? Like, how are they driving winning as a trio? I think that's going to tell us a lot about the viability of them and sort of, just how much you can kind of invest in them as your three going forward to sort of inform your roster decisions around them. They're going to be in different iterations. Surely there will be some where they're successful, some where they're not, some where they're playing in bench heavy looks and all of that. But I think if you're looking at when those three guys are on the floor together, or two of them are on the floor together, how are they performing? Are they driving winning minutes? And I think more than the actual win total, the sort of the on-off net rating of those guys is what's going to be the thing that really tells the story of whether this was a successful season or not. They're the most important guys. You can lump Grady Dick into here as well, I think. If he's part of a quartet with those guys where they're really driving positive play, the offense is looking strong. I think that is something you can build on and feel pretty good about going forward. But if they're like losing their minutes and getting run off the floor as a trio, you got to reevaluate some things for sure. And that's going to be a big thing to keep an eye on throughout the season for me. I'm curious. So I was on Locked On Fantasy Basketball with our pal Josh Lloyd, Canada's favorite guy. We were talking about the sort of hierarchy on offense between Barnes, Barrett, and Quickley. And he kind of asked me just sort of on the spot, like, how does it shake out? Last season, Barnes had a 25.8 usage rate. Quickley was at 26%, and RJ Barrett was at 24.6. Very, very sort of evenly spread. Obviously, those numbers are completely out of whack because the team changed 7 times during the year. Pascal Siakam was there getting heavy usage, and then you had Precious Achua and all these guys. Like, Achua had a 20% usage rate. That's crazy. Maybe we understand why the season didn't go so hot in the first part of the year. Anyway, I think it's interesting to think about the hierarchy. I think we maybe make too much of it sometimes of who's taking the most shots and who's not taking the most shots. And let's make sure every single game it's 1, 2, 3 in the order that we want it to be. I think this group in particular is not one where you're going to be sort of expecting the same outcome every single night in terms of who's taking the most shots. But how would you expect it to shake out as far as like who is running the most offense, who is taking the most shots, like the usage when it comes to sort of the traditional usage where it's just shot, turnover, or free throw at the end of a possession, or usage plus creation where it's, you've got the ball in your hand and you've either scored or created something for somebody else. Like, how do you think it's all going to kind of shake out hierarchy wise? It feels like Scottie will be number one. After that, I feel like it's a bit of an open question. And you could argue that, Quickley or Barrett might end up taking more shots a lot of the time than Scottie Barnes too, just because of the way all these guys play. Curious what your sort of handicapping of the hierarchy between the three is going to be this year.
Yeah, I think Scotty is going to see most of the ball, but I won't
Mm,
be surprised if Quickly ends up being the leading scorer. And it could be the Raptors' own version of, what we saw with Team Canada. It's like, yeah, Shea is the guy, but RJ got plenty of opportunity, right?
mhm.
And I think with Scotty, he's going to command so much attention that I think Quickly is just going to naturally have these opportunities to score that could end up seeing him as the leading scorer.
Mm.
RJ will get a healthy dose as well of opportunities, and so I think it'll all funnel through Scotty. But I won't be surprised, say if the jump shooting isn't at the level that you would think his prime will be at. then I could see him also looking to be more of a distributor still.
Sure. I actually think I have Quickley maybe having more run of the offense than Scottie. I just traditionally, it just kind of makes sense. You have a really easy Jakob Poeltl Quickley pick and roll duo you can grow with. And I forgot to mention this point in the last segment, but I do think having more Poeltl just on the floor with Quickley than they had together last year, like that's going to help Quickley get to the rim more often. I think that pick and roll chemistry was really nice for the stretches we saw it. We just didn't get nearly enough of it to get a full sample of it. But I think there's a world in which Scottie kind of becomes more unleashed as like a wing scorer, right? Like a slasher, second side guy who really takes advantage of sort of attention drawn by the Quickley Poeltl pick and roll in the middle. And then you have Barrett and Barnes kind of slashing off of that with Grady Dick kind of flying around and drawing attention on his own. Like, I think that could be sort of the core way this offense works. And if that's the case, like, I think Scottie ends up the leading scorer on this team. I think Quickley ends up as the leading assist guy. I think Quickley has a chance to be one of the leading assist guys in the NBA, period, this coming year. Like, he averaged 6.8 a game last year with a really bad supporting cast, throwing lots of passes to very not good basketball players. And I think just he had such, like, again, he got that point guard stuff down so quickly. I think he's got a real shot of being like a real assist merchant while also scoring close to 20 points a game. I think I would probably say Barrett falls second in terms of pure usage behind Scottie, and then Quickley will have sort of more in terms of like full usage of, you know, shots created for himself and others than anybody else. But I think it'll be pretty comparable between him and Scottie, the way it kind of evens out. But I think Scottie's in line to have a bit of a scoring jump here just because he doesn't have to do everything in the creation department. He doesn't have to go and sort of try to create from a standstill at the top of the arc. He can take advantage of other guys creating advantages, and I think it's going to benefit everybody. I actually think this offense stands a chance of being pretty good, at least for the starters. You know, the guys off the bench we'll see, but there's a lot of offense first guys coming off the bench too. But I think as a group, you know, Quickley, Barrett, Barnes plus Poeltl and Grady Dick, I think that has a chance of being like a pretty potent offensive group, because there's all sorts of different ways that can burn you. And Quickley and Barnes, I think, are going to have a nice sort of sharing off of the responsibilities. And I do think Quickley ends up having the ball in his hands more often by season's end. And I think it can be beneficial for everybody if that's the case. Any last parting shots here on the BBQ trio before we wrap up here, Big B?
Yeah, I guess the last thing I'll just say is in terms of expectations, this is really the last season that they get to have no, you know, concrete expectations, where it can still be about the growth. But following that, when we go into the 2025-26 season, those contracts are going to be on the books. And I think there is going to be a lot of pressure on them to really, you know, actualize their projected ceilings.
100%. Couldn't agree more there. We'll leave it there. Big V, you got anything you want to promote for the good people out there?
Yeah, Raptors in 7. My latest post is good to go. It's just looking back on how RJ and Kelly fared at the Olympics, and, you know, should we expect carryover? What do we really take away from the Olympics heading into the season? Sure. And you know, just kept it simple with this one.
Awesome. Everyone go check that out. You can find Big V's work on the internet at Vivek Jacob. You can also find me at Woodley Sean. You can follow, subscribe, rate, review the podcast wherever you get your shows on audio, and of course on YouTube as well. And we'll be back again next week. Like I said, we'll have at least one episode on Canada basketball, putting a bow on the Olympics with Oren Weisfeld. When that is, still TBD. And then we'll have all sorts of fun off-season-y stuff to get into. Again, down to 3 shows a week. So we'll be back 3 times for you next week, digging into all things Toronto Raptors, and looking forward to that very, very much. In the meantime, thanks so much for hanging out. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.